Hello, Reddit. I suppose I should start by saying I'm not entirely new here. I've spent some time reading posts, particularly in communities like this one, though I never imagined I'd have a story of my own that fit quite so definitively. But life takes turns you don't expect, and sometimes finds you navigating situations you never thought possible. This happened to me, F42, recently. For 15 years I was married to my husband. Let's call him H, M44. Our life together wasn't one of grand, dramatic gestures or whirlwind passion, perhaps, but it was comfortable, stable. We had built a home, shared routines, navigated the usual ups and downs of life side by side. We had our inside jokes, our shared history, our plans for the future, retirement, travel, maybe eventually downsizing. It felt predictable, in a way that I used to find reassuring. Looking back, perhaps complacent is a better word. One aspect of H's personality that I'd always known and largely accepted was his tendency to be charming, perhaps overly so. A flirt. It was usually harmless, directed at waitresses or shop assistants, a sort of background radiation I'd learned to filter out. I never felt truly threatened by it, especially not within our close circle. He knew where the lines were, I thought. Or perhaps more accurately, I thought I knew where my lines were. Central to that comfortable life, almost as foundational as my marriage, was my friendship with Stephanie, ex-BF, F42. Stephanie and I weren't just friends. We were the kind of friends forged in childhood playgrounds and teenage angst, the kind who acted as each other's shadow through college dorms and first jobs. Lifelong doesn't quite cover it. We were, for all intents and purposes, sisters. We knew each other's families, finished each other's sentences, held each other's deepest secrets, or so I believed. When H and I got married, Stephanie was my maid of honor, beaming brighter than anyone. Because of this deep, seemingly unshakable bond, I always considered Stephanie safe territory when it came to H's flirting. He'd banter with her, sure, they had their own rapport, but it felt familial, like teasing a sibling. She was Stephanie. The thought of anything more crossing the line seemed fundamentally impossible, a violation of the natural order of things. It's fair to say, though, that Stephanie's own personal life had always been more turbulent than mine. She seemed drawn to drama, often finding herself entangled with men who were unavailable, complicated, or just plain wrong for her. Relationship cycles tended to be intense and often ended messily. I'd played the supportive friend through countless breakups, offering tissues, advice, and a non-judgmental ear. I attributed it to her passionate nature, her wearing her heart on her sleeve. I never saw it as a potential character flaw that could impact me directly. Hindsight, as they say, is brutally clear. Our 15th anniversary was approaching. H and I had discussed doing something low-key, maybe a nice dinner out, just the two of us. But Stephanie, in typical Stephanie fashion, insisted on making it a bigger deal. She wanted to organize a surprise dinner party for us, gather our closest friends, celebrate properly. At the time, I thought it was incredibly sweet, just another example of her inherent generosity and her investment in our happiness. I readily agreed, touched by the gesture. The first discordant note, the tiny crack in the facade, began subtly, a shift in H's behavior. He became slightly more distant, glued to his phone more often, occasionally snapping when I asked innocent questions about his day. There were late nights at work that didn't quite add up, vague excuses for weekend errands, little things easily rationalized away. Stress, I told myself, midlife anxieties, the pressure of work. Then came the receipts. I was tidying H's home office space, something I routinely did, when I found a crumpled credit card statement shoved deep in a drawer, not filed away neatly as usual. Glancing at it, intending only to file it properly, certain line items jumped out. A charge for a rather expensive piece of jewelry from a boutique Stephanie loved. Definitely not something he'd bought for me. Several charges at upscale restaurants I hadn't been to with him. And then, the one that made my stomach clench. A weekend charge at a boutique hotel in a nearby town we'd never visited together. When I asked him about them, H became flustered, defensive. The jewelry was a potential client gift, he mumbled, unconvincingly. The restaurants were business dinners. The hotel? A solo work retreat to focus, which he'd forgotten to mention. His explanations were flimsy. His eyes wouldn't meet mine, and a cold dread began to bloom in my chest. The trust I'd taken for granted felt suddenly fragile. But the true confirmation, the moment the ground irrevocably fell away beneath my feet, happened by pure, sickening chance a week or so later. I had taken an afternoon off work for a dental appointment. Finishing earlier than expected, I decided to treat myself to a coffee at a small cafe in a part of town I rarely visited. As I waited for my order, I glanced out the window, and there they were, H and Stephanie, sitting at an outdoor table, heads close together, laughing. Then, H reached across the table, stroked her cheek, and leaned in to kiss her. Not a friendly peck, a lingering, intimate kiss that spoke volumes. He then took her hand, brought it to his lips. Time seemed to stop. The sounds of the cafe faded. All I could see was them, my husband and my best friend, looking for all the world like a couple deeply in love. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't ambiguous. It was blatant, brazen betrayal happening right before my eyes. I ducked back inside before they could see me, heart pounding, vision blurring. I stumbled out a side door, got into my car, and somehow drove home, though I barely remember the journey. The comfortable, predictable life I knew had just exploded. In the immediate aftermath of seeing them, reeling from the shock, my mind started racing, piecing together the lies, the excuses, the odd behaviors. And then, another piece of information clicked into place, something H had told me months earlier. About 6 months prior, H had come to me saying he'd made a decision. He'd had a vasectomy. His reasoning, which we'd discussed calmly at the time, was centered around us being content with our life as it was, feeling we were perhaps getting too old to start a family now, and wanting financial stability for our later years without the expense of raising children. He framed it as a practical decision for our future. I remember being slightly taken aback by the finality of it, but ultimately respected his choice, his bodily autonomy. We even had a text exchange confirming his appointment date, and him later saying it was all done. I'd saved that exchange, filed it away mentally under life admin complete. Now, sitting alone in our too-quiet house, the implications of that vasectomy collided with the image of H kissing Stephanie. The affair was one layer of betrayal, but the vasectomy added a strange, almost darkly comic layer to it, driven by a need for something tangible, something concrete in the swirling chaos of my emotions. I went back to H's office. This time, I wasn't tidying. I was searching, not just for credit card statements, but for anything. Tucked away in a folder with old tax documents, I found it. An itemized bill from the urology clinic, clearly stating bilateral vasectomy and the date, corresponding exactly to when he'd told me. Beside it was a copy of the post-procedure instructions and, crucially, the follow-up lab report confirming 0 sperm count. Undeniable, sterile, proof positive. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands shaking slightly. The initial shock was overwhelming. It wasn't just heartbreak. It felt like a physical blow. I functioned on autopilot for days, going through the motions of work and home life, a hollow shell moving through a world that suddenly felt alien. The betrayal felt multidimensional. H's infidelity, Stephanie's treachery tearing down decades of friendship, the lies layered upon lies. Then came the physical manifestations of the trauma. Waves of nausea would hit me unexpectedly. Panic sometimes seized my chest, making it hard to breathe. Sleep became fractured, interrupted by nightmares or long hours spent staring at the ceiling, replaying scenes in my mind. Food lost its appeal. I shed pounds without trying. It felt like my body was processing the emotional poison my mind was struggling to contain. Through this fog of shock and physical distress, something else began to crystallize. Anger. A cold, hard, diamond-sharp rage started to burn away the numbness. How dare they? How dare she, my sister friend, orchestrate this? How dare he, my husband of 15 years, participate? The sheer audacity of it all was staggering. My first instinct was primal. Scream, confront, destroy. Burn it all down immediately. But then, remembering the upcoming anniversary dinner, the one Stephanie was so eagerly planning as a surprise, a different idea sparked. A colder, more calculated thought. They wanted drama? They wanted a public declaration? Fine. But it wouldn't be the one they envisioned. The vasectomy documents on my phone felt like a hidden weapon, a precise, undeniable tool for detonation. Confronting them privately felt insufficient. It would allow them to control the narrative, retreat, spin lies. Number. This required a stage. It required witnesses. It required maximum impact. The anniversary dinner, their chosen venue for unveiling their triumph, would become the stage for their public humiliation instead. From that moment, a switch flipped. The tears stopped. Mostly, the trembling subsided, replaced by a chilling resolve. I started playing my part. I feigned ignorance, acted the loving wife, discussed dinner details with Stephanie with false enthusiasm. I compartmentalized the raging inferno inside, presenting a calm, unsuspecting exterior. Every smile I forced felt like sharpening a blade. Every shared glance between H and Stephanie that I pretended not to notice just fueled the icy fire within me. They thought they were playing me. They had no idea the game had changed. The night of the anniversary dinner arrived. Stephanie had chosen a stylish, somewhat trendy restaurant, not necessarily mine or H's usual taste, but definitely hers. She had, of course, organized everything, right down to the floral arrangements on the table in the private room she'd booked. The ultimate irony wasn't lost on me. Celebrating 15 years of our marriage, orchestrated by the woman who was actively trying to dismantle it. Our guests began to arrive, a mix of longtime mutual friends, a few relatives, people who had known us as a couple, and known Stephanie as my closest confidant for years. Their presence amplified the stakes considerably. These weren't strangers. They were the fabric of our social life. Their reactions would ripple outward. H seemed nervous, fidgety, perhaps sensing the weight of the evening or just guilty. Stephanie, however, was practically glowing. She played the gracious hostess, flitting between guests, accepting compliments on her wonderful gesture in organizing the party. She and H exchanged brief, loaded glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Glances I now saw with painful clarity. A shared smirk here, a quick hand squeeze under the table there. Each tiny interaction was another twist of the knife I was preparing to plunge. I meanwhile focused on my performance. I smiled, I laughed, I accepted toasts to our marriage with feigned gratitude. I even made a point of being slightly more affectionate towards H than usual, resting my hand on his arm, leaning against his shoulder, partly to lull any suspicion, partly out of a perverse desire to make the eventual fall even harder. Inside, I was a coiled spring, observing every detail, every interaction, counting down the moments. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken tension, at least for me. For everyone else, it was just an anniversary celebration. The main courses were cleared, dessert menus distributed. There was a lull in the conversation. Stephanie seized the moment. She stood up, perhaps a little unsteadily, beaming. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," she began, her voice carrying through the private room. Guests quieted, turning towards her expectantly. She walked around the table towards me, putting her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that would have once seemed supportive but now felt predatory. "OP," she said, her voice thick with false emotion. "I know this is your and H's night, and I truly want you to be happy." She paused, then leaned in slightly, almost a conspiratorial whisper that was still audible to those nearby. "It's for the best, really. Sometimes things just run their course." Then, straightening up and addressing the room again, her eyes locking onto H, she continued, tears welling up. Crocodile tears, I knew instantly. "There's something wonderful and unexpected I need to share." Another dramatic pause. She placed a hand protectively over her stomach. "H and I, we found something incredibly special together. And we're having a baby." Gasps rippled through the room. Eyes darted between Stephanie, H, and me. H looked down at the table, a mask of shock that didn't quite ring true, more like guilt caught in headlights. Stephanie continued, her voice gaining strength, almost defiant now, framing their affair as some kind of noble rescue mission. "He felt trapped," she declared, looking around at our stunned friends and family. "But love finds a way. We're starting a new life together. He's mine now." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. All eyes were on me. I could feel their pity, their shock, their morbid curiosity. Stephanie watched me, a triumphant, challenging glint in her tear-filled eyes. H refused to look up. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted my head. I met Stephanie's gaze directly. A small, cold smile touched my lips. And in a clear, calm voice that cut through the thick silence, I said just 2 words. "Keep him." The words "keep him" hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The initial shock on Stephanie's ex-BF face, the triumphant glint in her eyes, began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. My calm delivery, the absence of expected hysterics, clearly threw her off script. The room remained frozen, guests uncertain how to react to this bizarre turn. H, husband soon-to-be ex, still hadn't lifted his head from its slumped position over the table. While all eyes were still attempting to process my reaction, I calmly reached into my clutch purse resting on my lap. My movements were deliberate, unhurried. I took out my phone. The screen illuminated my face in the dim restaurant lighting. My fingers, surprisingly steady, navigated to the photos I had taken weeks ago. The photos of the urology clinic bill and the subsequent lab report confirming H's sterility. Clear, undeniable proof. I selected the image file of the lab report, the one with the stark sperm count 0, clearly visible alongside H's name and the date, just 6 months prior. I opened my messaging app, selected Stephanie's contact, attached the image, and pressed send. The entire action took perhaps 10 seconds. I didn't look at my phone after sending it. Instead, I watched Stephanie. Across the table, her own phone, lying beside her plate, lit up with the notification. Automatically, conditioned as we all are, her eyes flickered down to it. I saw her brow furrow slightly as she picked it up, perhaps expecting a message of support or confusion from another guest. Then her expression shifted. The residual smugness vanished, replaced by concentration, then disbelief. Her eyes widened, scanning the screen frantically. Her face, which had been flushed with theatrical emotion moments before, began to drain of color. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She looked up from her phone, her gaze darting towards H, then sharply towards me, naked panic starting to dawn in her eyes. The image on her screen held the irrefutable truth that dismantled her entire performance, her entire supposed future, in one devastating blow. The silence stretched for another unbearable moment, broken only by the distant clatter of cutlery from the main dining area. Stephanie's hand, holding her phone, began to tremble visibly. She tried to recover, to regain control. A shaky, unconvincing laugh escaped her lips. "What is this?" she asked, her voice unnaturally high-pitched, waving the phone vaguely towards me. "Some kind of joke? OP, seriously, you're losing it. She's crazy," she announced to the bewildered guests, trying to rally them to her side, to dismiss me as hysterical. "She probably forged this. She's always been jealous." But the bravado was paper-thin. Her eyes kept flicking back to the image on her phone, then to H's still bowed head. The panic was rising, bordering on hysteria now that her initial attempt at deflection had failed under my unwavering, calm gaze. When H still didn't react, didn't jump to her defense, didn't deny anything, Stephanie's manufactured composure finally shattered completely. She whirled around to face him, her voice escalating into a shrill cry. "H, look at me! Tell them she's lying! You told me you wanted this, that you wanted us. You lied to me. Is this true?" She shoved the phone practically into his face, demanding he look at the proof of his own sterility, the proof that contradicted everything he must have promised her. Finally, H reacted, but not in the way Stephanie, or perhaps even I, expected. He didn't try to deny the vasectomy. He didn't try to defend Stephanie. Instead, he slowly lifted his head, his face pale and blotchy, and turned his fury not on Stephanie but on me. "How could you?" he hissed across the table, his voice low and venomous. "How could you do this? Here? Now? This is private. Our private business. You're ruining everything." He seemed genuinely outraged that I had dared to expose his lies, his betrayal, his medical status in such a public forum, as if my method of revealing the truth was somehow a greater transgression than the truth itself. His accusation hung there, pathetic and self-serving. Seeing him offer no defense, no denial of the vasectomy, Stephanie seemed to crumble. Any remaining fight drained out of her. H's failure to deny it was confirmation enough. She didn't need me to say another word. The reality of her situation, pregnant, abandoned by the man she thought she'd secured, and now revealed as a liar and manipulator in front of everyone, washed over her. At the same time, H, having spent his brief burst of anger on me, seemed to deflate. Faced with Stephanie's distraught stare, the horrified or disgusted looks from our friends, and my implacable silence, he simply couldn't sustain the outrage. He slumped forward again, burying his face in his hands, offering no explanation, no apology, no further defense. Just silence. A complete shutdown. The atmosphere in the room was now thick with toxic embarrassment. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged wide-eyed glances. One older couple, friends of my parents, quietly gathered their belongings and slipped out of the room without a word. Others stared fixedly at their plates, wishing the ground would swallow them whole. The meticulously planned anniversary celebration had devolved into a slow-motion social catastrophe. I had seen enough. The revenge wasn't about prolonged torture. It was about precise public detonation and the clean break that followed. They had chosen the stage. I had simply rewritten the script and delivered the closing lines. Slowly, I gathered my clutch purse. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping slightly in the heavy silence. I stood up, all eyes, except for H's, still hidden, and Stephanie's, now staring blankly into space, tears silently tracking down her pale cheeks, snapped towards me. I surveyed the scene for a brief moment. The stunned faces, the half-eaten desserts, the palpable awkwardness, the architects of this disaster now consumed by it. Then I looked directly at the space between H and Stephanie. My voice, when I spoke again, was devoid of heat, almost clinical. "You two deserve each other," I stated calmly. "Have fun figuring out the paternity." Without another glance, without waiting for any response, I turned sharply and walked towards the door of the private room. I didn't run. I didn't stomp. I simply walked, head held high, leaving the wreckage of my marriage and my longest friendship scattered behind me like shards of glass on the restaurant floor. The muted sounds of confused murmuring followed me out, but I didn't look back. The days and weeks following the anniversary dinner were strange. Predictably, my phone initially blew up with calls and texts from H, from Stephanie, and from many of the guests who had been present. I ignored H and Stephanie completely, blocking their numbers after the first few desperate attempts. To the friends who reached out, I offered a brief, factual confirmation of what they'd witnessed, without embellishment or emotional outpouring. The response was overwhelmingly supportive towards me and utterly condemnatory towards H and Stephanie. They became instant social pariahs within our circle. Word spread like wildfire, of course. The sheer audacity of Stephanie's announcement, coupled with the brutal efficiency of my reveal, made for compelling gossip. I heard through the grapevine that H lost several business contacts who disapproved of his behavior. Some may have even been present at the dinner. Stephanie, already known for drama, found her reputation completely shredded. As predicted by my final comment at the dinner, the paternity question became central. Stephanie, it turned out, was indeed pregnant. Faced with the undeniable proof of H's sterility, the timeline simply didn't work. Under pressure, and with her life rapidly imploding, she was forced to confront the reality of her situation. I later heard, again indirectly, that she tearfully confessed to another mutual acquaintance, who promptly told everyone that she wasn't entirely sure who the father was, having had a brief, panicked fling around the same time she intensified her pursuit of H, likely as a backup plan that had horribly backfired. The frantic attempts to identify and inform the potential fathers became another layer of her self-inflicted nightmare. My own path forward was clear. The day after the dinner, I contacted a divorce lawyer. The proof of infidelity, combined with H's subsequent behavior, made the process relatively straightforward, though not emotionally easy. However, H did not accept the end gracefully. Cut off socially, facing professional repercussions, and blocked from contacting me directly, his desperation escalated. He started showing up at my workplace. He left rambling, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry voicemails on my office phone. He sent unwanted gifts and long, self-pitying letters to my home address. I'd stayed in the marital home initially while he moved out. It culminated one evening when he showed up banging on my door late at night, demanding I talk to him. That was the final straw. The next day, shaken but resolute, I filed for and was granted a restraining order. The legal system, at least, provided a necessary shield. It's been about 8 months now since that disastrous anniversary dinner. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. Thanks to the clear evidence of H's infidelity and the circumstances surrounding the end of the marriage, including the harassment that led to the restraining order, the settlement was significantly weighted in my favor. I kept the house. He kept his debts and his ruined reputation. Healing isn't a linear process. There are days when the phantom limb of that 15-year marriage aches, days when the raw wound of Stephanie's betrayal feels fresh. The double loss, husband and best friend in one fell swoop, is a profound one, and I don't pretend otherwise. I've spent time in therapy, processing the grief, the anger, the sheer shock of it all. Rebuilding trust, not just in others but in my own judgment, is an ongoing process. But alongside the pain, there's also an undeniable sense of liberation, relief. The comfortable, predictable life I had was revealed to be built on lies. Blowing it up, while devastating, was ultimately necessary. The revenge, meticulously planned and executed at their moment of hubris, provided a grim sort of satisfaction. It wasn't just about hurting them. It was about reclaiming my narrative, exposing the truth with undeniable clarity, and ensuring they faced consequences for their actions. It was about ensuring I delivered the final cut, not them. I'm rebuilding my life, focusing on my work, reconnecting with genuine friends and family who rallied around me, tentatively exploring old hobbies I'd let slide. Some days are harder than others, but the future feels like mine again, unburdened by their deceit. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand how two people I loved and trusted could inflict such calculated cruelty, but I know I survived it. And I know I'll never allow myself to be that complacent, that trusting, again. They wanted a dramatic ending? They got one, just not the one they wrote. That's all for this story. I'll be back with another one. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It motivates me to create more content like this.